Welcome back. It's C-Dub, and this is a podcast about house music. Tonight we are stepping into one of the most electric chapters in New York City's musical history. There was a moment in the 90s when the clubs grew bigger, the crowds grew bolder, and the music reached a level of emotional gravity that shaped an entire generation. This was the era of Junior Vasquez at the Sound Factory, the rise of the megaclubs across Manhattan, and the moment when house music began to stretch beyond the underground and into mainstream culture. Buckle your seatbelts, take a deep breath, and let's get into it. Under the vision of Peter Gatien, New York began to experiment with scale. Limelight, housed inside a deconsecrated church, offered stained glass windows and marble floors that glowed under strobes. The tunnel stretched long and narrow, a place where each room carried a different fantasy. Club USA sat on Times Square like a wild attraction, complete with a slide that carried dancers from the balcony down into the crowd. Palladium mixed ballroom glamour with club futurism. These clubs treated nightlife as theater. They were built for spectacle and for the feeling that anything could happen inside their walls. The soundtrack of the megaclub era needed a conductor, someone who could take a massive room, a restless crowd, and a long night and shape it into a story. That conductor was about to arrive. Junior Vasquez had been in the city for years before he became a name people whispered with reverence. He started as a studio assistant, then remixer, and eventually found his way into the booth at Baseline. His early sets were raw, emotional, and tightly shaped. You could hear the influence of disco, but he pushed the music harder, darker, and more cinematic. Everything changed when the Sound Factory opened on West 27th Street. The factory became Junior's canvas. His marathon Saturday night sets often lasted until noon the next day. Dancers would talk about arriving in the dark and walking out into bright sunlight with mascara running and sweat drying on their skin. Junior had an uncanny ability to build tension for long stretches. He kept dancers suspended in anticipation and then broke the room open with a kick or a vocal line that felt like release. He treated the booth like a laboratory. Rumor had it he would isolate frequencies and push EQ curves in ways that made the body feel the shift before the ear fully understood it. Regulars began calling themselves Junior's children. They followed him with devotion because he created a space where pain and joy could move through the body without explanation or judgment. During the AIDS crisis, the dance floor became a place where people carried grief quietly inside them. Junior built sets that allowed that grief to surface without language. This wasn't therapy in the clinical sense. It was community surviving the only way it knew how. New York was a magnet for models, musicians, and artists. The supermodel era was thriving. Designers were pushing boundaries. And celebrities wandered into Junior's booth because they wanted to feel the way the factory felt. Madonna appeared frequently, and their artistic relationship became its own legend. Junior remixed tracks for her, and she fueled his visibility. Their bond was complicated, but electric. When he created the track, If Madonna Calls, it sparked tension, humor, and myth. It became one of those New York stories people still repeat because it captures the wild intimacy of that era, when fame and nightlife were always bumping into each other. Designers also drew from this energy of his nights. Runways picked up the rhythm of house music. Magazine spreads reflected the neon glow of the clubs. The line between fashion and nightlife blurred to the point where it felt like they were breathing the same air. While Junior held the energy of the night, another revolution was happening during the day inside recording studios. Record labels were beginning to understand something dancers had known for years. A remix could change everything. Producers and DJs like David Morales, Masters at Work, Frankie Knuckles, Satoshi Tomie, Francois K, Hex Hector, and Armin van Helden turned remixes into cultural events. Major artists began requesting club versions of their singles because the dance floor had become a testing ground for sound. A remix could give a track a second life. Sometimes it even charted higher than the original. Mariah Carey built an entire era of her career through remixes with David Morales. Whitney Houston's label commissioned club mixes that turned ballads into anthems. Madonna, Janet Jackson, Toni Braxton, and Deborah Cox all had singles that lived their fullest lives inside clubs before reaching radio. One of the most dramatic examples was Armin van Helden's remix of Tori Amos's Professional Widow. It transformed a quiet piano track into a peak hour monster heard around the world. That remix became a symbol of how house had infiltrated the mainstream while still holding onto the spirit of the underground. The remix economy also gave rise to a new understanding of DJ power. A remixer could rescue a struggling single, energize a tour, or even reshape the way audiences understood an artist. This was a moment when the booth and the studio were equally influential. The 90s also became the decade of the house diva, and New York played a central role. Artists like Jocelyn Brown, Liliana Holloway, Linda Clifford, Barbara Tucker, India, Ultra Nete, Suzanne Palmer, and Christine W. shaped the emotional vocabulary of the dance floor. Their voices carried gospel roots, ballroom echoes, and the sense of survival that came from living through the hardest parts of the decade. Their vocals gave house music its emotional backbone. A single belt could pull dancers into a moment of unity. A whispered line could send a chill through the crowd. New York turned vocal house into something sacred. As the decade progressed, a strong Latin and Caribbean presence began to push the city's sound toward a deeper rhythmic identity. Masters at Work blended salsa, jazz, and Afro-Latin percussion into house. Producers shaped what became known as the NYC tribal sound. Ballroom DJs refined their beat patterns, and those rhythms eventually appeared in mainstream tracks long before people realized where they came from. The city's diversity shaped the pulse of the music in a way that remains visible today. By the mid-90s, the circuit party culture evolved into its own ecosystem. DJs like Danny Tenaglia and Peter Rauhofer became known for emotionally charged sets that stretched through the night. They created long-form musical storytelling that mirrored the journey of queer men searching for freedom, connection, and transformation. The circuit sound was powerful. It had a physicality to it. It invited dancers to enter a trance state where the body knew what to do without being told. This was a decade when the underground and the mainstream faced each other and decided to share the same oxygen. New York treated house music as culture, not just sound. It allowed clubs to become art spaces. It allowed DJs to become storytellers. It allowed fashion, sexuality, grief, survival, and joy to express themselves through rhythm. And through all of it, the spirit of the garage lived on. Frankie's belief that music could heal people shaped the foundation of everything that followed. Even when the city grew louder and more commercial, that core remained. House music wasn't simply something people listened to. It was how they endured, how they celebrated, how they remembered who they were. Next week, we go deeper into the voices and stories of the artists who built this emotional universe. For now, I want you to sit with this era. Let it settle into your body. This is one of the greatest chapters of house music history, and its echoes are still alive in the world we dance in today. I'm C-Dub, and this is a podcast about house music. Until next time, keep the beats alive.